Welcome back, everyone. We are now moving on to Jessie Lynn's talk about moving to self-managed open access publishing. Jessie is a recovering library and archives academic, currently working at the Federal Office of the Arts. Until 2021, she was voluntary vice president and managing editor of the Australian Society of Archivists, and actively involved in the move from a proprietary publishing model to open access, which is fantastic in my view. Jessie has a PhD that considers how zines, queer archival and collecting practices, and has taught collection management and an archival practice in a couple of Australian universities. She has a lapsed zine maker and stencil press printer, which is really interesting. Anyway, on to you, Jessie.
Thank you, Sarah. And hello to everyone I'm speaking to out there. It's hard to know who's there, but I think there might be some members of the audience who can probably add more to the story that I'm telling. So I'm going to take today's session as a bit of a storytelling session and knowledge sharing, and hopefully bring some other voices in as people ask questions or as we talk about experiences. I'm here today at my home in isolation in Canberra on the lands of the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge the important work that Indigenous people have always done and continue to do in preserving and thinking about how we know things. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always is Aboriginal land. Today is an interesting session. I am not involved. I don't have a day job in publishing, and as an lapsed academic, I have been mostly on the other side of publishing, writing articles and publishing them. My role in the ASA as managing editor, though, led me to develop lots of new skills and knowledge in the publishing field and the academic publishing field in particular. What I love about my work with the ASA in particular is that the journal that the ASA produces is what we call a society journal. And so it's led and driven not predominantly by the academic agenda that a lot of journals are published and driven by, but it's also really member driven. And so that idea of collective organisation comes to the fore here. And the ASA, the Australian Society of Archivists, is always putting members first and at the forefront. And that's what has driven a lot of the decisions we've been making along the long journey of this journal. So today I will give you a bit of a potted history of how we've come to be where we are at this point. As Sarah said, I am the recent vice president and managing editor. I'm no longer on the Australian Society of Archivists Council. I was there for 3 years and I loved my time there. There's a lot to learn. Encourage anyone who's interested to get involved in these governance roles in your professional associations. I think it's really important that we diversify the voices that we have in leadership roles in our professional associations as well. As someone with a very young child, it was really interesting for me to bring that voice to some of the discussions and how we think about care responsibilities, for instance, that the professional association offers. So what else did I want to say? And so my interest has always been in open access publishing, and I joined council to continue to pursue that interest, mainly because the university I worked at the time didn't have a subscription to a couple of key archives journals. And that was really problematic for me as an educator, because I wanted my students to be reading the research that was at the cutting edge of our practice and our profession and the theory. And it was really difficult to then be able to use the material that was in the journals because the library didn't have a budget to subscribe to them. And when they did, they were eventually there was Archives and Manuscripts was bundled up within a bigger database. And I'm not a librarian. Academic librarian. I don't really know the intricacies of that, the way those financial structures are set up. So we could get some articles from Archives and Manuscripts. Then what became the issue was that many of the articles that I wanted to use that were historical articles weren't available anywhere except in hard copy, and so it required a lot of interlibrary loans and the like. So that's how I came to be part of this project. Before me, though, have been, and still going on, huge numbers of active members who have played a role in the journal over its life, either in editor roles, in author roles, in managing the content and the relationships and the like, and a lot of voluntary roles in recent projects. So for those of you who are going, ASA, what are you talking about? Is it the authors? Is it the anesthesiologists? Well, who are these ASAs? We are the archivists. The Society of Archivists is the national body, peak body that advocates for and supports both archives and archivists, and by also record keeping. And James, you might correct me here, we have around 1,000 members or so. We have been going since 1975, so there's a long history, and we have a long an important role in advocating for the profession and for the workers in the profession, alongside our friends in the GLAM sector. So we have really strong relationships with ALIA, for instance, and other GLAM professional associations. So one of the things the Society does, amongst many, is produce a journal, and this journal is Archives and Manuscripts. The journal was started in 1955, and I'll go back, I'll come to that, and it was published in print only by the Society as a society journal up until 2012. And so it's important to just look at some of the materiality of the journal, I think, at this point, to say anyone who got the journal got it in print form up until that point. Although Catherine may correct me there, but that's, I'm just going to put that out there. From 2012, the journal was published by Taylor and Francis, who are one of the big players in the academic publishing world. And then the journal was available print and online. And then from this year, the Society will be publishing the journal again, self-publishing it, and we'll be publishing it open access. And importantly, we will also be publishing it print as well as online. And that's important to think about when we go back to that point that I was making about us being member-driven first. The print copy has always been a material object that gives people, from a lot of the research and surveys we've done with members, it's the object that people hold on to and gives them a sense of belonging to the Society. Interestingly, in some of the surveys that we did in the last few years, we have people telling us that they don't actually read it, but they still want to get it, which is always interesting. Without fail, we will get a few full-run copies of the old print version offered to the Society for our archives every year. And as I visit people on my journeys, I often get shown, people come and show me their run of beautiful colours of print journals on their shelves. And so the print copy was something that was really important to us and has given us a bit of a challenge now as we work forward, but it's important. So what has been interesting for me is to look at how we got to where we are now for what has been a very long-running journal, nearly 75 years, and for a journal that has been driven purely by volunteer labour, in my mind. So originally, the ASA didn't start till 1975, as I said, but the archive section of the Library Association of Australia started the journal in 1955. And that LAA then became ALIA. So for those first 20 years, ALIA, in theory, owned the journal, our Australian Library and Information Association. From 1975 onwards, the ASA has continued to publish the journal. From 2002, so it's a more recent 20-year past, the journal moved from being a journal publishing articles of note for the profession and of research and publishing research to where the articles are peer-reviewed. So it became a fully fledged academic journal. By, I think from memory, I can't remember exactly when this whole world happened in academic world, but by the late 2000s, the Archives and Manuscripts was an A-ranked journal in the old way of referring to how journals were ranked, which put it up there with some of the best in the country, and made it a very desirable journal to publish into as well. Around 2010, 2011, the Society started to go through some troubles. We call them the troubles. We transferred publication to Taylor and Francis, was one of the side effects of those troubles. In 2017, it was put to members that maybe we should consider not going on with Taylor and Francis, or maybe consider staying with them for another 3 years. It was decided to stay with another 3 years, and that was all by member vote, and that's important to know. But by 2019, in 2019, those previous print issues that had been up until early 2000s had been fully digitized, all the metadata created, and then we released them all online as an online archive of 1955 to 2011, fully searchable and fully open access. So that was a huge project. That was 10 or 15 years in the making to get that done. A lot of people had played a big role in that. I just happened to be the person steering it at the end. And for that, we used an open source platform called OJS, and supported by PKP at Simon Fraser University. And then we decided not to renew the contract with Taylor and Francis at a council level. So we surveyed members, and council made the decision. And since that decision, we've spent the last 14 or 15 months getting ready to move to that full open access model. That's a very brief timeline. I just wanted to, and I've summed this up, I think. The important things to note here are these troubles. So the role of the Society as itself, as the publisher of the journal, and how financial sustainability is really important in order to have a sustainable journal. And so those troubles really led into a lot of the decisions that were made to move to Taylor and Francis. There was a lot of tension around the time about that decision. So the move to Taylor and Francis was controversial within the member body, but it was seen as at the time the way forward to ensure that the journal could keep being published. There were a lot of activism. There was activism around that time, and the editorial board of the journal did change quite significantly due to that decision. It's been very interesting seeing how that's been managed over the past 10 years. And I think it's important to remember always about the decisions you make being political decisions. Taylor and Francis had a particularly unique green open access license for only 4 LIS journals, and I think that's been quite productive for the Society. So that license means that so instead of everything being locked down forever on the Taylor and Francis platform, every volume is released open access after 3 years. So it's a 3-year embargo for that license. It's been useful for us in how to manage some of the member expectations around access to information. One of the benefits of being a member of the Society, however, is around access to the journal. So we had to really weigh up some of our thoughts around restricting access and what Taylor and Francis offered in that, and how we made more political or activist decisions around access to information, which is what the open access model is about. So we did a lot of surveying of members, and we have always been surveying members and asking them about this. We did a lot of research over that whole 10-year period. So we moved to Taylor and Francis, and from that point committed to making a good decision into the future about staying. Importantly to note too is when we think about open access and publishing, and is actually that for these 10 years and the years previous, that there is actually copyright ownership of all the content. And so it's not like we can just say, oh, it's open. So we have to think about copyright quite a lot at this point, and we are having some interesting discussions with lawyers around this as well. So from what we can see and what we know is the ASA has a content copyright, and Taylor and Francis own the visual copyright of the sort of layout of those 10 years worth of journals. And that's been good for us to get to the bottom of, but it's been interesting as well. So the online archive, I've got the link there. I'm happy to share it. It was a huge job to seek permission. So talking about copyright again, every author of every article or their delegate or their heir had to grant copyright transfer and agree to open Creative Commons, or I think it's a Creative Commons license on their material. So that was a huge project of managing all that data, the permissions data, and we have that all safely stored away. Once that was all done, then we worked there's a lot of evaluation done of service providers to host the journal. PKP was decided as the best option. So there's a cost involved. The society carries that cost to host the journal on the PKP server. So that's the Public Knowledge Project at Simon Fraser University. And we launched that, and there's still a lot of tweaks to be done, but the best bit has been working with open source software, and that's what OJS, the Open Journal System, is that there's some flexibility to tailor it when we need to. Interestingly, there we procured the services of a journal publishing service. I'm not sure what they actually call themselves, to do the bulk of the transfer work and the upload work with us, and to do the desktop publishing and design of some of the parts of the website. And I think that was a good recognition from the society of the fact that none of us are experts in all of these different fields. And so it's more cost efficient and sustainable for us to actually pay the experts rather than those of us on council at the time or those volunteer members trying to get the expertise. We're really good at archives. We're not so good at managing websites necessarily. So the last 15 months has been a big project trying to get this happening. Our contract with Taylor and Francis had a 12-month notice period, and so the first thing we had to really do was make that decision. We gave the notice, and so our contract finished with Taylor and Francis on 31st of December 2021. And so we have terminated any relationship with them, and they're no longer giving the access that we have to the journal in that way. So from there, once we'd made that decision, that was quite a big decision to make. And I feel like at the time, the council that made that decision, one of the motivating factors for us there was around the statement we were making about who can access information and how they access it. And what was important to council, and still continues to be, I believe, is the information and about practice and the findings of research are important for all to be able to access, regardless of where they are and what limits they have on that information. We have a large member base in the volunteer sector or in the small archive sector that might not necessarily have as much as a budget to access that information, for instance. There is also a huge, the global audience for our research that gets published is quite important as well. During 2021, we did a lot of research. It was very interesting trying to find a place to publish the journal. So we weren't able, the council is not staffed incredibly well. I don't know, James, you may have some other thoughts on that. But we don't have someone whose job it is to manage a journal. And so we needed to find someone to host the journal for us. And to do a lot of and who had the expertise in managing journals. We approached a couple of local university presses who publish open access because the decision had been made to go open. As to be expected, we weren't able to work with them because despite us even having a budget to spend on it, there's just not enough resources in universities at the moment. And so the council decided to continue our relationship with the publishing services support company based out of Europe who work with PKP to provide that front end service and also help manage the back end of the publishing process. So we have budgeted, there's a yearly budget line in for the council, for the society to manage, so to cover the cost of managing the journal. We made a decision to print the journal, and some of the decisions around that printing are still to be finalised. So there's a lot of research still to be done there. We're looking at print on demand models, and we're trying to incorporate some of the politics of labour and distribution through those decisions. But at the end of it, we will need to make sure we still get a print copy to those people who are entitled to it, mainly members and subscribers. We've been learning a lot about publishing. So a lot of the work that TNF did was very untransparent. And so that's been interesting and hard to know what we don't know until they suddenly tell us that here's some information for you that we don't do anymore. And most importantly, we've been communicating with members very clearly about the decision making and where we're going forwards. So it's been a very bumpy road, I would say. If we go all the way back to the decision to move to Taylor and Francis, and now the decision to move away from Taylor and Francis. But it's been excellent. The last 2 or 3 years of my involvement has been really interesting in it. Some of the findings we have, or some of my own personal reflections, are that it's really important to be able to feel confident to spend money. Volunteer labour is really excellent, but it's important that we recognise people's skills and knowledge and reward them for it with money. It's often one of the other really important things has been the networks that we've lent on and are very grateful for around the open access publishing community, and they are in those university libraries and presses, as well as with colleagues at sister type journals, for instance, Archivaria in Canada. And the relationship between the editorial board and the journal is also very important. They were very supportive of the decision going forwards. So networks are very important, and communication. And then the other thing I would like to reflect on there is that if you get the chance to make these type of decisions, don't be afraid to bring your politics and where you stand in it to the fore. So, because you'll realise that lots of people might also be thinking the same way, and so that voice is really important to have out there. I think, Sarah, is that enough time? Should I leave some time? I'm not sure if there's any questions there.
There is actually quite a few questions for you. So.
I'm going to stop sharing if that's, or maybe I can put this up for a little while, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. First question, would you do it again knowing what you know now?
Yes, totally. I think what's motivating me now is to know that more people are going to be able to access the information. And actually we think, and we're seeing it, we're going to get more research being published as well. More people choosing the journal as a venue for their research. So yes, definitely.
How aligned do you think the members are in the idea of open access? Is there a better feeling of the members that than there are troubles despite all the changes?
Can you say that one? I'm like, yeah, can you say that one again? Is that
how aligned do you think the members are in the idea of open access? I guess that's the best way to put it.
I think it's either a measure of active or apathetic, and so it's the apathy is, it's not a bad thing to be apathetic and not have an opinion, but those who do have opinion, we had very little active resistance to the idea of moving to open access. So it was either people didn't really need to know, like didn't know or didn't want to know, or were very supportive.
How much was the move to real open access with PKP driven by the general membership, and how much was it driven by the council?
That's a hard question to quantify the answer to. I'm not really a quant person, and I can't give you stats, but there were a number, I would say, of vocal members and always were since we made the decision to move to Taylor and Francis, we being not me on the council, but the society. There's always been a vocal group about that of members. And yes, sorry.
No, keep going.
I was just going to say there have been, there is always a vocal minority, but the underlying message we got through our surveys as well was that it was either yes, supported, or unless it was, there were some concerns, I think, in the survey about the cost of the society. That's all.
And this one's probably more of a comment, but I assume or hope that there's a paper or two in the archive about the bumpy road that you were telling us about.
Yes, it will come. Now I don't have to be an academic. I'd love to write a paper about doing this work. So yeah, definitely some work coming.
Wonderful to hear. Did the move to PKP for the 2011 and earlier journals influence your decision to go PKP again this time?
Yes, so that our preference initially was to go local, and so to go with a local press. And once we realised we couldn't do that because it wasn't a sustainable model, we went, and we did evaluate a couple of different online journal systems, but we went with PKP because we did have that pre-existing relationship. And it gives us a smooth kind of image for the journal.
Okay, and one last question. Hypothetically, if there is some Australian Library Association out there that wanted to do this with their publication, do you think that there would be different or other barriers, and how would you suggest that they go about changing their journal?
I think the part of the decision making that was the easiest was the confidence, the financial stability that the society has at the moment. So we're not in an unstable position, and so that stability gave us the confidence. So I think for any society, but any association that might be considering it, looking at your financial stability in the first place, because the thing that was also quite eye-opening to me was that we were making money from Taylor and Francis. There was a bit of an income stream coming in, and so what we've had to do is sacrifice that income stream and look to diversify it in other ways, which I think is definitely, so we've done a lot of planning around that too. But I think it's been very well received by our GLAM community, the decision. From what we can see, we haven't had any resistance, and so I would encourage other GLAM type journals to consider it as well.
I would definitely encourage that as well. Well, thank you so much, Jessie, for joining us today, and it was amazing hearing about the process that you've been through. Next up at 5 p.m, we have Daniel Sobey telling us about musicbrains.org and wikidata.org. Hopefully you can join us at 5 o'clock. Thank you again, Jessie.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Bye.